Tonight, Barack Obama gives Americans another lecture about how bigoted they are. It's December 16th, and you're watching The Ezra Levant Show. Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government for why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Just an incredible speech by Barack Obama the other day at a citizenship ceremony for new Americans. It was his response to the national conversation sparked by Donald Trump about Muslim migrants and Trump's proposal to have a pause until the problem with Muslim radicals can be properly addressed. Obama was having none of that. He started off by saying how valuable immigrants have been to America in the past, and that's true as far as it goes.
We can never say it often or loudly enough. Immigrants and refugees revitalize and renew America.
There's truth to that, though some immigrants and refugees do better than others, but it's true. Here's more in that vein.
Immigrants are the teachers who inspire our children, and they're the doctors who keep us healthy. They're the engineers who design our skylines, and the artists and the entertainers who touch our hearts.
Okay, but no one is saying America should not have any immigrants. No one is even saying America should not have Muslim immigrants. Trump said that Muslim immigration should be paused until the jihadist threat is better addressed, to screen out people coming to kill Americans. I don't think most Americans or Canadians are opposed to immigration as an ideal or even as a historical experience. We're concerned with what is being done now in the name of immigration. In the U.S., that's particularly acute on two issues: illegal immigration from Mexico, including criminal migration and Mexican drug rings, and recently, especially since the San Bernardino terrorist attack, Muslim immigration that doesn't screen out radicals. Obama only used the word Muslim once in his whole address, and he didn't mention terrorism at all. Look, I get it. It's a speech to welcome new immigrants, but instead of exhorting Muslims and all other immigrants to abandon any illiberal medieval ideas like, say, Sharia law, and adopt Western ideals of the equality of men and women and the separation of mosque and state, the only mention Obama made about Muslims was shaking his finger at old stock Americans for being so bigoted.
We must resolve to always speak out against hatred and bigotry in all of its forms, whether taunts against the child of an immigrant farm worker or threats against a Muslim shopkeeper.
What threats against which Muslim shopkeeper? Why would he talk about an apocryphal hypothetical like that instead of the very real, very deadly result of the San Bernardino terrorists? Why is he teaching new immigrants? That's who he was speaking to. Why is he teaching new immigrants that Americans are bigoted by nature and he needs to give Americans a stern lecture? How does that even make sense? I mean, a black president talking to new immigrants, how does it even make sense to imply that America is possibly a racist country in its nature? But that was the heart of Obama's speech, actually. Here, let me prove it to you. Instead of exhorting new immigrants to be liberal and Western and embrace American values and abandon old grievances, he chose to condemn America itself as historically racist, bigoted, and mean. Here, listen.
From the start, Africans were brought here in chains against their will and then toiled under the whip.
Well, yes, that's true. Every continent in the world has had a history of slavery, including pre-Columbus America, including Europe, Asia, of course, Africa itself. But America fought a civil war in part over slavery and abolished slavery and has had blacks in every high office in the land. Why tell about the shame and not about the redemption? Why emphasize a negative chapter that has been remediated, other than to denigrate and deride and teach new immigrants to nurse old grievances and think of themselves as victims? By the way, Obama himself was not descended from slaves. His father was Kenyan. He himself can't claim any historical grievance. He's merely adopted it, appropriated it as a political trick. But here's more. Here, I want to play for you a whole minute of Obama welcoming newcomers to America by condemning America in a rant that could have been written by Bill Ayers himself.
A century ago, New York City shops displayed those signs, "No Irish need apply." Catholics were targeted, their loyalty questioned. So much so that as recently as the 1950s and 60s, when JFK had to run, he had to convince people that his allegiance wasn't primarily to the Pope. Chinese immigrants faced persecution and vicious stereotypes and were for a time even banned from entering America. During World War II, German and Italian residents were detained. And in one of the darkest chapters in our history, Japanese immigrants and even Japanese American citizens were forced from their homes and imprisoned in camps. We succumbed to fear. We betrayed not only our fellow Americans, but our deepest values. We betrayed these documents. It's happened before.
This is a president welcoming new Americans in 2015. His message is clear. You are coming to a country of bigotry. In case you feel like Americans, you're not really. You're radicalized, racialized, as the leftist phrase goes. You can never be part of the center, so be a perpetual anti-American derider like Obama is. Now, by the way, there was a huge wave of Jewish immigration to America about 100 years ago. They weren't really refugees, they were just immigrants, though they were fleeing inhospitable places like Tsarist Russia. Some of America's greatest patriots came from that wave, including my all-time favorite exemplar of what a great immigrant should be like, the late Irving Berlin. He was a Russian Jew who came to America and loved it so much, he spent his whole life writing patriotic songs. He wrote God Bless America. He wrote White Christmas, even though he was a Jew. He loved America. He wanted to be more American than Americans. Obviously had commercial hits too, like Putting on the Ritz, dozens of others. But when World War II came, he wrote a musical play and traveled the world entertaining American troops. That's the perfect immigrant in my mind. But there is only one mention of Jews in all of Obama's talk.
In the Syrian seeking refuge today, we should see the Jewish refugee of World War II.
Really? Really? So Muslims today are like the Jews of the Second World War, are they? By the way, under a Democrat president named Franklin Roosevelt, America closed its doors to Jewish refugees in the Second World War, just like Canada did under a liberal prime minister named Mackenzie King. But that's the one historical injustice that Obama left out of his condemnation of America, wasn't it? But stop for a moment. Are today's Muslims really the new Jews? Are Muslims being exterminated by the million around the world? Is there a modern Adolf Hitler saying he will kill every Muslim and doing it? And if today's Muslims are like the Jews of the Holocaust, were the Jews back then, were they killing people in the name of their Jewish Bible? Were there Jewish suicide bombers? Were there Jewish terrorist attacks on the West? Did Jews come to America and demand that Jewish religious law supersede American law? No. Muslims aren't the new Jews. Jews are the new Jews. Jews are being attacked around the world, whether it's the Jewish supermarket in Paris or the ongoing terrorist attacks against Jews in Israel. Jews are the new Jews, Obama. There were elements of Obama's speech that were just fine. A boilerplate welcome to America, lines usually delivered by some low-level bureaucrat at a ceremony like this. This was a special speech Obama chose to give to rebut concerns about violent immigration that's not coming to be American, but to conquer America. Obama didn't have a word against that violent immigration. He saved his venom for Americans themselves, lecturing them as bigoted Islamophobes and racists. And he kept his most vicious barb, as usual, for the Jews. Stay with us. After the break, we'll have an update from Alberta and the farm politics in that province.
my favorite bill. But you know, it really is in many ways. And then there was Bill 6. Now,
That's Rachel Notley cheering, jeering, laughing at Bill 6 being forced on Alberta farmers. She says it's her favorite bill. That video, we showed that video a couple of days ago. It has been seen almost 200,000 times. According to YouTube, it is the second most shared YouTube video in all of Canada, second only to the new Star Trek movie trailer. Why is that being shared? I think it's obvious, because the mask fell. It slipped for a moment. And Albertans who thought Rachel Notley was just some sweet, well-meaning premier, and yeah, she's a little bit to the left, but she's just like us, the mask slipped for a minute, and we saw her true nature. She's actually a vicious activist who, I don't think anyone who sees that video will be under the illusion that she's acting in good faith anymore, that she actually wants to consult or talk to people. She is an agenda-driven, hardcore leftist. Joining me now via Skype from Fort Saskatchewan is our Alberta Bureau Chief, Sheila Gunn Reid. Sheila, great to see you again.
Hi, Ezra. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you, more importantly, for your good work on the ground in every corner of the province. How many farmer rallies, town halls, consultations, protests do you think you've been to in the last month?
You know what, Ezra? I've lost track, maybe 8 or 9. I know I went to 4 over the weekend, so it's quite a bit. It's really been my full-time focus lately.
It's amazing, and we're grateful to you for taking the time. I know you're busy and you have a big, busy family. I want to ask you a question. You've probably met, well, thousands of people. I know from watching your reports that some of these rallies have 400 or 500 people. You listen carefully, and these rallies are fairly democratic and fairly polite. Some of them are sort of family affairs. How many farmers or farm workers out of these thousands that you have seen, how many of them support Bill 6?
I haven't met one.
You haven't met one? Now, are you sure that there wasn't one person who went to the mic and said, might be a good idea? Think carefully. In all you've met thousands of farmers, not one in support.
Not one in support. And you know what? It would have stuck out in my mind. I've met plenty of farm workers who've come to the rallies to make sure their side of the story is told, because they don't feel like they're being accurately represented in the media. They feel that a certain group of activists are who are being represented in the media, and not the true people who are wearing the dirty boots in the feedlots. They're not being represented in the media at all.
Yeah, I mean, Bill 6, I call it the Farm Unionization Act, because if you look at how much is in the act, most of it goes to bringing union laws, labor laws into a private sector environment. It's really about serving the union masters of the NDP. But that one element that claims to be about farm protection and safety is being done in the name of farm workers. And I've seen your videos of farm workers saying, I don't want this, I don't need this, I've got great insurance right now, thank you very little. And more importantly, don't do this in my name.
Well, and that's the thing. This law, I mean, we know that Rachel Notley has never been a fan of WCB, so why is she forcing 45,000 Alberta farms and ranches to be part of a system she called broken and miserly? And I've heard from farmers and from farm workers saying the coverage that WCB would provide would be far less and far less comprehensive than the insurance they currently have. It actually is counterintuitive to force these people to buy WCB insurance.
Yeah, I mean, what's the obsession with forcing them to join a government insurance scheme that, as you point out, is less comprehensive? It's less suited. I mean, a workers' compensation scheme, I'm not an expert in the field. I haven't studied it a lot. It seems like it's more built for a factory setting or an office setting, a 9-to-5 workplace, maybe where there's workplace hazards like a stamping press or something. What is the ideological reason to try and force a city factory type system onto a rural setting where, punch clocks and official jobs, like on a farm, you do whatever you have to do. There's not official job categories. The idea of, hazardous thing, I mean, the whole place is a hazard. It would be shut down under these city union rules. Other than just being bullies, what's the ideological payoff for the NDP of bringing farmers under a government insurance scheme? I'm trying to understand what they're up to, like what they're trying to achieve.
Do you know what I do? I wonder that. I know that the Alberta Federation of Labour has been talking about unionizing WCB for a long time. They've remarked that WCB in Alberta is one of the only workers' compensation boards that's not unionized. So I wonder if Notley and her crony union friends are trying to unionize the WCB by providing it all these extra customers. And look what we've done for you. We've improved the working conditions at the WCB and giving you all these extra files, and everybody has lots of work now. I wonder if that's the case. But I also think that...
Sorry, go ahead.
It does seem odd, and I think it's just one of those things that the NDP really doesn't understand. They just think that they can just plop a big bureaucracy right on a farm and it's supposed to fit, and it doesn't.
I don't get. I mean, that's what happens when you have an entire caucus without a single farmer in caucus, let alone in cabinet, or a single rancher, or a single oilman. I mean, I keep saying that would be like electing an entire government in Newfoundland and no one's ever set foot on a fishing boat. I mean, how do you even do that? I mean, putting a union activist, O'Neill Carlier, as agriculture minister, that is kooky. But I got two more questions for you before we let you go. And one is, this viral video that we started this segment with, of Rachel Notley cackling. I'm going to call it a cackle. If I laughed like that, people would say, stop cackling. She was cheering, jeering, cackling at farmers. It was so clear. That's why the video went viral. It wasn't my commentary, I'll tell you that. That video has been seen by tens of thousands of Alberta farmers. You have been out amongst these farm protests since then. Has it changed the temperament? Do people now think, oh, Rachel Notley is not a good faith meddler making mistakes. She's actually malicious. Has that changed minds or hearts?
You know what? I don't think it's going to change hearts and minds among the farmers. They already know what Rachel Notley's all about. They've sat in at the consultations. They can see the contempt from the NDP when they're not willing to give any answers. But I think it will change hearts and minds in the greater population of Alberta. I think it was a true reflection of just who Rachel Notley really is. And I was at the rally at the legislature yesterday, and that was all anybody could talk about, was how contemptuous Rachel Notley seemed. A lot of people were remarking that they never thought that someone could have more contempt for Albertans than Alison Redford. But Rachel Notley has managed to step it up a notch.
You know, it's like you're walking by a picket fence and one of the wooden pickets is missing, and you have a quick glance inside the fence before that plank is put back up. You can't unsee what you've seen. I think that was that picket fence plank moment where for just a second, for just 1 minute, we saw what was truly in Rachel Notley's heart and her mind. She despises farmers, and when she thought she was with friends, guard down, she let her rip. Okay, my last question for you, and probably the most practical one. Sheila, this bill was rammed through the legislature. They invoked closure to shut down a debate. To me, that shows contempt right there. Why the rush? Why the rush? Why no consultations? But here's my question. You say farmers are still rallying at the legislature and around the province. The law is passed. What are farmers hoping to achieve? What is the fallback line of defense? Where's the next front in this battle?
Well, the next front in the battle is in the regulations, the occupational health and safety regulations. Those have yet to be drafted or even have exemptions cut out of that. So the concern is the farmers want to make sure that the people who are drafting these new regulations really understand the reality of farm life, because as we've seen, they frankly don't. The fact that this bill was even brought forward means that people making the regulations just don't understand. So that's where the new fight is to make sure during these consultations that the farm voices are being heard.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I mean, you've got the chief of staff to the premier, who's a union activist from Toronto. The deputy chief of staff, Anne McGrath, is an avowed communist. I mean, it's not an insult. That's how she described herself. You've got her Calgary outreach officer, a lobbyist from Vancouver, Marcella Monroe. I mean, basically, you're bringing in city union organizers from Toronto and Vancouver. It's no surprise that they don't understand, and don't care about Alberta farmers. People say, Ezra, what are you talking about this for? You're in Toronto yourself. You're not a farmer yourself. That's not where you come from. It's true. But I respect Alberta farmers and ranchers as I would respect any Canadian. But more than that, I see an animosity towards farmers and ranchers that I think is a microcosm of her despise for all industry, all private sector initiatives, and frankly, all families. That's why I think we have to stand with the farmers, even folks who don't know anything about farms, who live in the city. The farmers today are the oil men, well, right now at the same time, and the rest of Alberta industry and private sector tomorrow. Sheila, I'm really grateful to you for the work you're doing throughout Alberta. You keep up the fight, okay?
Great. Thank you, Ezra.
Thanks, Sheila. That's our friend Sheila Gunn Reid, our Alberta Bureau Chief, who has led our coverage on this important issue. Hey, if you haven't done so yet, visit our website, savealbertafarms.ca. We've got a petition there. We've got all our videos in one place, and we'll keep this fight up as long as farmers are fighting. We'll be there with them. Stay with us. More after these short words.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
There's no one more earnest and self-righteous than a global warming extremist. They want to save the world, and they want you to know about it. They also want you to pay for it. So it's worth it when we can find a fact or a study to have a little laugh at them. I think it brings them down a notch. Joining us now from the Washington, D.C. area is my friend Marc Morano, the publisher of ClimateDepot.com. Marc, there's this study at Carnegie Mellon University. I know it wasn't meant to be humorous, but I find it hilarious. It's about the global warming effect of eating vegetables, being a vegetarian, compared to eating meat. Can you tell me about the study?
Yeah, this is a ground-changing study. I mean, we have everyone from Paul McCartney ordering meatless Mondays in schools. Arnold Schwarzenegger recently came out urging everyone to go vegetarian to save the planet from global warming. It's been an article of faith, if you will, not science, but faith, that eating vegetables and rejecting meat will save the planet and help stop global warming. Well, this study turns everything on its head, and intuitively, you sort of expected that. I mean, they're basically examining the impacts of lettuce and all these vegetables. And when you think about it, they're a low-density food because you need lots of farmland and massive amounts of time and effort and input by farmers to produce foods that are relatively low in calories and even in protein and other dense nutrients. Whereas beef, cattle, and I love the line where they say bacon is better for the earth than lettuce. This is a ground-taking study, and it's interesting because now if you want to save the planet, eat lots of bacon. It doesn't really ring with a lot of Hollywood celebrities. I don't know if this is going to catch on.
You're so right. I mean, in the study, they basically suggest that to get the kind of calories from lettuce that you get from bacon, it has 3 times the global warming footprint to get it from lettuce because, as you say, it's like a panda bear eating bamboo. You just got to do it all day to get the calories, whereas bacon, I mean, I don't eat the pork bacon. I'm more a turkey bacon guy myself. You don't have to eat it all day to feel great. You can eat it all day. But you're right. Here, I mean, it's funny to joke about. It's funny that the science proves that the vegetarians are wrong. I think a lot of people, though, choose to be vegetarians not for health reasons, not for reasons of saving the world, but for reasons of snobbery, self-righteousness, virtue signaling, another way of saying, I'm better than you. It's like the personal equivalent of having a Prius. You don't do it because it's a better car. You do it so you can shame your neighbor. I drive a Prius, unlike you. I'm a vegetarian, unlike you. And so this takes away the moral fancy pantsness of it. That's why I like this study. That's why I'm laughing along with it, Mark.
Yeah, I remember. And I mean, vegetarianism is an ideology. There's absolutely no hell. Now, here I am talking as a nutritionist. You know, I'm not a nutritionist, but I play one on the Ezra Levant Show. But there's no reason not to eat meat. Now, the question is, how much meat do Americans, do Western lifestyles have too much meat? Probably. Our cholesterols are probably too high, the fat content, too much fat. However, there's no reason to ban meat. In fact, I've talked to hardcore vegetarians at these animal rights marches, and they talk to me about how difficult it is diet-wise to replace all the foods to meet their ideology. And they talk about how their strength goes down significantly because they lack the enzymes and the heavy, dense protein from meat. So for someone to say, I will not eat meat anymore, it's an ideological decision, not a health decision, number one. And number two, they can no longer claim it's to save the earth. Yeah. And keep in mind, as we had a professor from NY University who actually wanted to use drugs and genetically alter humans to make them not want to eat meat. And this is actually in my film Climate Hustle. His name is Professor Matthew Lau. We actually discussed this. And we've had people promote poop burgers and a whole host of other disgusting things like eating insects, making it part of the Western diet. And that's all because of global warming fears. So now this whole cottage industry of poop burgers and shrinking humans so that we eat less and eat more vegetables and also eating bugs is now going to be faced by this Carnegie Mellon study. And so we'll see if this study stands. They're going to go after it because it's a narrative buster and they don't want the narrative broken.
Yeah. You know what? I don't think there is a single human being alive who is a vegan that doesn't tell someone about it within the first half hour of meeting them. Like if you go to a party, say, oh, hi, I'm Ezra Levant. What do you do? Here's what I do. What's your name? Well, I'm so-and-so. And if they are a vegan, I will find out, not because I care, not because I asked, but they feel impelled to tell me because it's virtue signaling. It's, I'm morally superior than you. I am more interesting than I normally would be because I've chosen this freakish approach. By the way, if you look inside your mouth at the way nature makes your teeth, those are meat-eating teeth. That's not a vegetarian's teeth. I'm speaking as an amateur dentist now, Mark. Listen, we're having some fun here, but it is so counter-human, anti-human to be anti-carbon because carbon is the stuff of life. It's the stuff of all plants. It's the stuff of all the food we eat. We are made of carbon. It's one of the most common elements of the periodic table. It is bizarre anti-science, anti-evidence-based policy to try and rid humans and our life and our economy of the sixth element on the periodic table. Last word to you, Mark.
Well, absolutely. I interviewed Dr. Peter Singer, a big animal rights guru, years ago. And he was advocating, of course, he didn't do it necessarily for health reasons or because of global warming, but he was advocating not eating anything animal-based because he believed it was immoral. In other words, humans don't need to eat other animals, and and he was an animal rights advocate. Well, the problem with animal rights advocates on the other offshoot of this is why would you put humans, if you think animals are equal to humans, which is essentially their message, why do humans have to act different? In other words, animals eat animals, humans eat animals. That's the sort of the natural order of things. Why do they want to change that? And that's where I think they fall apart. It becomes an ideology, and it becomes a wacky ideology that just becomes self-contradictory after a while.
I think you're right. Well, listen, it's a good laugh. I love that line that lettuce is 3 times worse for the environment than bacon. I'm going to use that at every party I go to counteract every vegan who just has to tell me about his latest new thing. Marc Morano, ClimateDepot.com. Great to see you. Hey, folks, stick around after the break. Your letters and tweets to me.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Viewer feedback, David writes, I want to really thank you for everything you're doing to keep this country on track. You're truly fearless. I traveled to almost all of the NDP public consultations and fought for equal and fair treatment. They tried to divide and conquer us. As a Hutterite, I feel we have succeeded in bringing our farmer and rancher friends and neighbors closer to us because we chose to stand with them united. I have been warned that Bill 206 in Alberta is the next big one to watch for. Keep doing what you're doing. Finally, a real media source. Hey, thanks very much for your passionate letter. I tell you, I mean, I'm from Alberta myself. I've spent some time traveling around. I know Hutterite colonies. I haven't spent any time on them, but I know enough about Hutterites to know that this Hutterite political activism in the last month is unprecedented. Well, maybe going back centuries when Hutterites were persecuted in Europe, so they fled en masse to North America to be left alone. Hutterites, in a way, are the ultimate libertarian conservative dream community. They're self-sufficient. They don't go mooching off the government for welfare. They just want to be left alone. And they're very industrious, hardworking folks. I mean, the idea of a Hutterite on welfare is just unthinkable. So to see Hutterites go and protest against a farm bill is quite something. You know the NDP is off base. And the reference there to standing with non-Hutterite farmers is important because Rachel Notley said, all right, you Hutterites, I'll give you a special exemption from the law. Just stop being mad. And the Hutterites said, no, thanks. You're not going to treat us legally different. We're not going to have sort of a legal apartheid here in Alberta. Very courageous. And that was a beautiful letter, so thank you for sending it. Chris writes a letter, says, just finished watching the Republican nomination debates, and they never once talked about climate change. Unlike our leaders, they're too busy figuring out how they're going to protect their citizens from terrorists. If the Republicans win the election, I am moving to the States, at least for the next 4 years. Well, the funny thing is, even the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed by Bill Clinton, was never ratified by the U.S. Senate. In fact, it was voted down 95-0. Every Democrat voted against it. Why? Because they have enough, they realize that they have to be grown-ups. They're the United States. They can't sack their own economy, which is really one of the goals of the Kyoto Protocol, is to push down America and lift up China, Russia, and third world countries. So they have a self-preservation gene, I suppose. And we saw that even with John Kerry, who is an awful Secretary of State, but he insisted that this new Paris global warming agreement not be binding and enforceable. And so it's not, because America is not going to commit economic suicide to have some leftist fantasy come true. Unfortunately, we here in Canada do not have a grown-up in charge, even on our party on the left. And Justin Trudeau is hell-bent on implementing a carbon tax to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, if Rachel Notley doesn't kill it first. A quick letter from Frank, who writes, how is it that I haven't heard any Rebel news since Friday? Well, I don't know, Frank. I mean, we post stuff all the time. Just come to our website, TheRebel.media. Stuff every day. Now, Rod Drown writes this from BC. Let me explain it. I'll just start by reading what he wrote. He said, this posting by someone from Edmonton named Kathleen Smith popped up on my Facebook newsfeed. She makes some serious allegations against Rebel Media, including that you are fanning the flames of hatred against the NDP Alberta government and are the ultimate cause of death threats against NDP cabinet ministers. Here is the posting taken from her site, which you may want to examine. Okay, so I did go, and I'm just going to read it really quickly. This is from Kathleen Smith's website. If you share Rebel Media garbage in the feed, I will block you. I will no longer turn a blind eye to the hatred and lies spewed by a piece of human clickbait who has fertilized the angry, hateful, violent threats against Premier Notley and several of her female cabinet ministers. Sometimes the best way to silence a vile faction is to render them irrelevant. Don't share, don't click, don't engage them on Facebook nor on Twitter. Don't post that garbage out of a sense of moral outrage, because that act of posting in outrage is exactly what Levant wants you to do. That is what his entire business model is based on. You make the lies and the attacks from the Rebel Media gain stock by refusing to be a pawn in their clickbait game. I make it stop by blocking anyone in my feed who is participating in his game and gutter wallowing. Enough is enough! Woo-hoo, holy cow. Couple things there. The first is we have never, ever called for, countenanced any violence at all. That is a complete fabrication, and it's not an accidental fabrication. It is a tactic of the NDP and their supporters to silence critics. We have shown you footage from a half a dozen of the most peaceful, family-friendly farm protests around. The only thugs are the union bosses that are trying to ram things down on farmers. In fact, as we showed you last week, 4 NDP MLAs in a row have been caught lying about their critics. Shay Anderson, Cam Westhead, Margaret McQuaig-Void, and Brian Mason himself. All 4 NDP MLAs accused farmers of threatening violence, and all 4 of them were later caught and had to say, no, we made it up, I'm sorry. So this is the NDP tactic. Smear and defame any critic as calling for violence. What a lie. We are good faith critics against a bully government, and we will not be shut up by being smeared as violent. That's just a laugh for anyone who knows me. But there's another point here that caught my eye. Kathleen Smith, that name rang a bell because she also goes by Kiki, and she's a liberal activist. I don't think I've ever met her. But a few months ago, that liberal, Kathleen Smith, sent me a long and detailed email. She wanted my help with a free speech issue. She reached out to me because she knew I cared about free speech, even for people I disagreed with. So I read all the material she sent to me. It took me an hour to go through it. I don't know why I wasted so much time on it. And I wrote back to her and I said, yes, I will help you. Just give me this, this, and this. And she wrote back and said, thank you, I will. And now in the end, I never heard back from her. But isn't it interesting that Kathleen Smith, when she was desperate for help, someone to stand up for her free speech, she emailed me and said, please help. And I said, sure, and I didn't make a fuss about it. I didn't toot that horn. I didn't mention it until today. Today, we see what she thinks about free speech. She wants to smear people who disagree with her as if we call for violence. You watch my shows. You've never seen me call for violence. I have never called for violence in my entire life. It's a smear, it's an attack, and she's a bit of a censor on her own page. Isn't that the left for you? Kathleen Smith is an authoritarian bully who doesn't want other people to have their say. But when she was in the soup, she called me for help, and you know what? I said, sure. Well, that's it for today. I appreciate you coming around and watching the Rebel.media, even if Kathleen Smith, the hypocrite from Edmonton, will block you from her Facebook page. You know what? I should tell you our web statistics. Since we started, 4.9 million individual Canadians have come to our website. In fact, we had a record week. I'm not too worried about a single liberal from Edmonton who wants to close her eyes and ears and say, I can't hear you, I can't see you. My name's Ezra Levant. I fight for freedom every day, and I appreciate you joining me. Good night, everybody.